I actually wrote a blurb for this book, so I'm kind of like invested in it in some weird way, a conflict of interest perhaps, but I liked it very much, and I meant what I said on the back of the book. It's for sale here, like all the books of the readers here, from Mobile Libris sells books, and they take credit cards and cash. You and I could work out a barter deal if you want. Anyway, so the first reader is the author of this book, Paradise Lost, Searching for the Garden of Eden. It's a very entertaining book. She's also written for Salon, Lapham's Quarterly, Sanskrit Chronicle, and the Boston Globe. Please give a hearty, restless hand for Brook Wilensky-Lanford.
Thank you. It's a little bit too tall. Better? Yeah. Can you hear me? Hi. So my book, Paradise Lost, Searching for the Garden of Eden, is about people who think that they can actually find the Garden of Eden on the map of the earth. It's a true story. So I'm going to read from the very beginning and sort of introduce you to the whole project that way. In the beginning, I was just following a family rumor. Sometime in 2004, my father told me that my great-uncle William had been looking for the Garden of Eden. William had died in 1971 before I was born, and all I knew about him was that he lived on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and was a highly regarded allergist at Columbia University's Medical Center, where his father, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, had discovered the structure of vitamin B1. Most of my father's relatives were practicing scientists. If they really thought they could find a biblical place on the rational earth, the news was surprising, to say the least. I had to know more. Was it all a joke? Where was the Garden of Eden supposed to be? How were they going to get there? Did they make the trip? What did they find? My father didn't know the answers to any of these questions, so I tracked down William's daughter, Phoebe, my second cousin, who told me that the rumors were true. Her father had been looking for the Garden of Eden. Phoebe's parents had both been interested in archaeology and frequently visited the collections of antiquities at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Sometime in the 1950s, when Phoebe was a young girl, William and his cousin, Dallas Sherman, a dashing Pan Am pilot, as how he's described, had hatched a plan to go to Eden to, quote, fly around the suspected area and look for signs of the site. Phoebe didn't remember where the suspected area was or what the signs of the site were supposed to be, and anyway, the plan never materialized. Needless to say, she wrote to me, nothing happened beyond what I would have called cocktail chatter. I admit my heart sank when I heard they never flew to Eden, but something had happened. They believed that there was a place to search for. This was a mystery. If I'd thought about it at all, I'd assumed that people had stopped believing the Garden of Eden was a real place somewhere back in the Middle Ages. Or certainly once the theory of evolution began to show that man had not been created all at once in a place mentioned in the Bible. Apparently not. William and his family had belonged to the venerable Brick Presbyterian Church and Dallas to St. Bartholomew's Episcopal, both of them on Park Avenue. These were surely not the kind of churches that required belief in a literal six-day creation. And yet my great-uncle still believed in the Garden of Eden. I tried to find Dallas Sherman to see if he could help me understand how this was possible. I did find another elderly airplane pilot named Dallas Sherman, who told me wonderful mistaken identity stories about my great-uncle's cousin, who, he'd just heard, had recently passed away. The trail seemed to have gone cold, but I couldn't get the story out of my head. I imagined the two of them, William and Dallas, sitting down with a martini at the Union Club, loosening their ties, and mapping the book of Genesis on a cocktail napkin. Perhaps an olive reminded them of the forbidden fruit in the tree of knowledge. Sticklers for scientific accuracy, they might have noticed that the Bible never says apple, just fruit. I could almost hear William discussing what species of fruit Adam and Eve might have eaten in the same matter-of-fact tone he would have used to discuss hypersensitivity mechanisms and management. My hyper-rational relatives still held out the possibility that science could find the Garden of Eden in the 1950s. Proving that the apple, or fruit, does not fall far from the tree, I too looked first to science. There must have been some reasonable explanation. Some archaeological find must have been uncovered, some new scroll translated, must have been in all papers, it must have been huge. If I could, with a little digging of my own, I could figure out where this major discovery was and where, what this major discovery was and where, maybe then I could imagine William and Dallas out of the Union Club and onto a plane. I began with a subject search in the library catalog for Garden of Eden. There were far too many titles to skim quickly, so I narrowed it down to books published after Darwin's On the Origin of Species in 1859 and before William's death in 1971. That didn't help. Lo and behold, the Garden of Eden had been found in Iraq, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Mongolia, the Seychelles, Florida, California, Missouri, and Ohio, at the North Pole, under the Mediterranean near Crete, in Sweden, the Persian Gulf, and Egypt. And that list only goes back to the late 19th century. No sooner did one authoritative account come along than another popped up to supplant it. Archaeologists did have theories, but so did college presidents, military officials, country preachers, and ordinary citizens. And every single one of them claimed that he could prove scientifically that his was the one perfect spot described in the book of Genesis. How could I tell whom to believe? I kept reading. Books, pamphlets, academic journals, newspapers. Want to get into the Garden of Eden for $1.10? Garden of Eden, its position on the globe definitely located. Were there 2 Gardens of Eden or only one? And of course, Paradise Found. Most of these works, I noticed, belonged only to the local library of their author. I found myself calling manifestos out of cold storage in Ohio and asking the University of Hong Kong to digitize crumbling memoirs for me. Columbia University had a non-circulating copy of the British engineer Sir William Wilcox's 1919 book on Eden, but it was still classified as an engineering title. So I was required to read From the Garden of the Eden to the Crossing of the Jordan in the engineering library, next to exhausted undergraduates studying biomedicine or atomic energy. I wished I could have heard the theories out loud from their authors, the way their first audiences did, in grand theaters, elite clubs, and tiny churches. Some books arrived still bearing the literal marks of their creators, the next best thing. There was a dedication from the Floridian L.V.E. Calloway to his Baptist alma mater in Jacksonville. There was a greeting typed on letterhead from Boston University President William Warren to his colleague at Union Theological Seminary, requesting $2 payment for this copy of Paradise Found. Say Swantai's 1914 pamphlet, The Real Situation of Eden and the Origin of the Chinese, tastefully library bound in red, came with a bilingual English-Chinese map tucked in the back. The, quote, route of Noah after the flood was inked across Mongolia in the author's own minute, spidery hand. Such traces of obsession proved contagious. How could somebody possibly be so sure that they knew where Noah went after the flood? I became just as determined to understand the Eden seekers as they had been to put Eden on the map.